During my years with UNRWA, I suggested several ways that the agency could improve its operations. But I found that these sort of suggestions were not welcomed by the people in charge. I started, as Hillel said, as a senior lawyer, but not the senior lawyer, and neither the senior lawyer nor the other members of the UN staff were receptive to really any changes to be made to UNRWA. After leaving the agency, as a visiting fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, I wrote a monograph entitled Fixing UNRWA, which urged UNRWA to make a large number, actually, of reforms. It's now 15 years since I wrote that, and other people have also made critiques of UNRWA and suggested ways it could be improved. And as near as I can tell, all of those suggestions, mine and other people's, have remained unwelcome, and they certainly remained unheeded. With the recent intelligence indicating that large numbers of UNRWA staff are associated with terrorist groups, a lot of the calls for reforming UNRWA have somewhat fallen by the wayside and been replaced by calls to end UNRWA. But how exactly would that be done? There are three ways that I can think of that it could, in fact, be ended. The first one is the General Assembly of the United Nations created UNRWA, and it could end UNRWA. As a practical matter, that's probably not going to happen. Most recently, in December of 2022, the General Assembly once again renewed UNRWA's mandate for another 3 years. The votes on that were, there was one vote against renewing UNRWA, there were 10 abstentions, and there were 157 votes in favor of continuing UNRWA. So as a practical matter, as I said, I don't think it's going to happen in the General Assembly. Another way to end UNRWA is for the donor nations to withhold their donations, which is a bit of what we've been hearing today already, moving the donations from UNRWA to somewhere else. In the past, that has not been overwhelmingly successful. In 2018, the Trump administration eliminated all American aid to UNRWA. But other countries, including European countries, increased their aid to try to offset the loss of the American aid. And to a very large extent, that did occur, and UNRWA was not forced to make any changes of significance at least. In 2019, somewhat better story, Switzerland, Belgium, and the Netherlands temporarily withheld their donations due to a scandal involving UNRWA's Commissioner General. And their donations were renewed, but only after the Commissioner General had resigned. So there was a bit of a modest success there. Right now, we have, as I think some of the speakers have mentioned, a situation in which 18 of the largest donors have withheld their donations. They have paused them. But the language used with this discussion of pausing has suggested that the donations would resume once the UN internal investigations, which we've heard about, were completed, and UNRWA gave assurances that corrective action was being taken. Still, that's not very encouraging, really, but still, there are two things about this that are unprecedented. Firstly is the large number of donors who are pausing their donations. That's 18, and they constitute at least 2/3 of the amount of money UNRWA needs to meet its professed budget. The second thing is that the US is being pressed by the Congress to eliminate funding, and that has forced the administration to mention that it is looking at alternative, i.e. non-UNRWA, ways to provide aid to Gaza. Again, that's something that the Americans have not done before. And one can hope, at least, that other donors who have paused will be trying to do the same thing. So I'm not sanguine, but I believe it's possible that the donor nations could defund and thus end UNRWA. But it is not 100% sure by any stretch of the imagination. A third way to end UNRWA is for the host nations to refuse UNRWA access to the areas under their jurisdiction. Now, as a practical matter, Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon will not take that step. They see themselves and they want to be seen as being supportive of the Palestinian cause. And in addition, they fear that they may be the ones who end up paying the bill. Israel, though, which controls the borders of Gaza and the West Bank, is different. Israel has been hinting that it would be using a defeat of the terrorist forces in Gaza and the subsequent Israeli occupation to create a new and peaceful self-governing authority. There have been a lot of rumors in the Israeli press about exactly what that would consist of. But as part of the ambitious plan, UNRWA would be replaced by other organizations as quickly as possible without creating some sort of a humanitarian disaster. The Israeli military in particular has been concerned that removing UNRWA immediately would cause them great difficulty in their operations. As of last Friday, though, these hints have become more realistic when Netanyahu, in fact, the Prime Minister himself, said that it has become official Israeli policy to remove UNRWA and to create a peace-loving state in Gaza. However, even if the Israeli plan succeeds in Gaza, and even if it is successfully transmitted to the West Bank, it really doesn't appear that UNRWA is going to disappear like tomorrow. Not in Gaza, certainly not in the West Bank, and for sure not in Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon. It just won't happen. So, in my view, while UNRWA still exists, whether in whole, that is in all 5 of those areas, or even just 3 of them, even if it just continues in Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon, the donors, if they can't end UNRWA, they must insist upon it being reformed. The reforms are ones that people have indicated for many years that should be made. And I'll give you the most important ones. The first one, of course, which is it's become to the front because of the events of October the 7th, is that all UNRWA staff members and all beneficiaries as well should be vetted for terrorist ties, using information provided by the donor nations and the relevant host nations, including the Israeli government. Second, as I think Ambassador Ross mentioned, those agency-denominated Palestine refugees who are not actually refugees, according to the UN Convention and Protocol relating to the status of refugees, should be removed from the rolls of UNRWA. There are about 1.8 million of these oxymoronic citizen refugees in Jordan alone. This is out of the, about 5.9, so in the stroke of a pen, you could reduce the size of UNRWA dramatically. Thirdly, as I've urged on UNRWA many times in the past, they should move from a status-based, i.e. a person who's called a Palestine refugee by their definition, to a need-based provision of services. There's no particular reason why people who don't need aid should be given aid. It makes less available for those people who do need aid. Fourthly, UNRWA should eliminate from its currently used educational materials all anti-Israel, anti-Semitic, and other material incompatible with UN principles. And it should immediately revise its textbooks and curricula as necessary. This has also been urged on UNRWA for many, many years, and the excuses they give for not doing it are really quite weak. They insist that they have to use local textbooks so that when their students graduate from grade school and go to high school, that they will be properly prepared. This is as if there was some sort of UNRWA mathematics, which is different from Syrian mathematics. There's no reason why, and I've proposed many times, that they should have all their materials vetted by somebody, some neutral body like UNESCO, to remove any anti-UN principles material. And lastly, I've also repeatedly said, and it still is a big issue, UNRWA, and particularly its commissioner generals, should refrain from making political comments, which they do all the time unnecessarily. They could leave that to the UN echelons here. So in summation, I think for the first time, as Adi mentioned, there's a real possibility of movement toward ending UNRWA, at least, as I've said, in Gaza and the West Bank. But that said, so long as UNRWA operations continue, donor nations should demand that those reforms I've just mentioned should be enacted. Doing so would make UNRWA more rational, less political, and much smaller, and when the time comes, easier to end. Thank you.